potential roadblock for President-elect Joe Biden and his transition team appears to be growing this morning. A top official appointed by Donald Trump is refusing to allow Biden's transition to go ahead. She's preventing his teams from getting the information they need for the very complex transition process and the money, too. This is the official who heads up the General Services Administration. That's an obscure branch of the U.S. government that controls millions of dollars specifically set aside to pay for the transition process. This official is reportedly holding off until the Electoral College meets in December and formally recognizes Biden as the winner of the election. A member of Biden's transition team tells the Associated Press they are considering legal action as a result. Administration officials say they're only doing what the Clinton administration did when George W. Bush and Al Gore contested the 2000 election in the courts. Well, that historical reference gives us the starting point for a conversation this morning with Thomas Schwartz, who is a professor of history and political science at Vanderbilt University. He's in Nashville, Tennessee. Transition is one of his specialties. And, Professor, we're delighted to welcome you as a guest this morning.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the program.
If you would, give me a little bit of a brief tutorial. How important is this transition period?
Well, it has become in the 20th century, as America has become a world power, a very important time. Normally, the issues have to do more with national security questions, so that, for example, there's a great desire not to have anything during a period of time in which there's a transition of power, in which there might be a challenge from a foreign adversary or some sort of event or crisis abroad. And so that has usually been the key issue in trying to have a very smooth transition of government, is the fears that an adversary might take advantage of that in some sort of way. And so it's been a major thing during the 20th century and now into this century as well.
So those are the stakes and why we focus on these 11 weeks from one administration to the other. What normally happens when you said smooth? What normally happens when it moves from one to the next?
Well, you would have the offices and money available for the transition team of the president-elect to be able to start planning for their takeover of responsibility. Importantly, for example, President-elect Biden would receive the Presidential Daily Brief, which is a security brief. The best intelligence that America has on what's going on in the world would be given to him and to Kamala Harris. This type of thing would then allow them to be able to be briefed on what is going on in the world in general. But the issue is really this notion that the new people should have time to meet with and discuss the problems and the agenda with the people who have been in office. And there are a fair number. I guess one estimate would have it about 3,000 jobs that are largely political in the American government, and this would allow that transition.
To have the next administration ready to hit the ground running, right, to speak colloquially, when they take over on January the 20th. There have been some really quite lovely traditions that have evolved during the transition process. We've pulled up some of the letters, Professor Schwartz, from outgoing presidents to the incoming president. For example, there's one, Dear Barack, from George W. Bush. There's one, Dear George, from Bill Clinton to George W. Bush. And the one that's maybe worth reading a little bit is Dear Bill, from George H.W. Bush. Pulling up some of the quotes. You will be our president when you read this note. I wish you well. I wish your family well. Your success now is our country's success. I am rooting hard for you. And they leave that, don't they, in the desk drawer for the incoming president, right? They
do indeed. And I think that George H.W. Bush is particularly interesting because he was the last one-term president to be defeated. We've had in the past three presidents have all served 2 terms, and that is their limit. But George H.W. was defeated by Bill Clinton in what was a fairly bitter race. But he was a man of great grace and charm and character, and I think that letter shows that.
Absolutely. Dignified, gracious, even in painful defeat. And yet, so here we are in 2020, a similar situation, defeated after 1 term, and we are hearing, as I was just mentioning in the prelude to you, Donald Trump's administration not handing over the money, not giving the access. How much of a departure is it the way Donald Trump is handling things?
Right now, it seems like quite a departure. I think it is not terribly surprising. Donald Trump has been a president who breaks norms, who's broken many even though I think there is pressure, probably from both his family and some supporters, not to go out on a terribly bad note. Now, certainly, he can go ahead with some of these legal challenges. They've so far been thrown out. If he does wait until December 14th, that is a bit much, which is when the Electoral College meets. But nevertheless, he would be entitled to do that. It is not the most, obviously, it's not something I think people welcome. I think there's a general desire, even among more moderate Trump supporters, to see something of a more graceful transition of power.
Given how much he seems to be digging in with all of the legal challenge he continues to announce and no concession, I mean, what if he never leaves? Is that even a scenario?
Not really. I think certainly he is the type of person, and his temperament often encourages people to this sort of darkest scenarios. But I doubt that the American institutions and American legal practices are set, I think, are quite strong. And I think they've managed to resist many of his departures from norms over the last 4 years as well. And I think when the Electoral College meets and a new president is declared, he has no other choice. He will leave office. Hopefully, he will do it more gracefully than he's already shown. So
creating major headaches, perhaps greater than necessary headaches for the Biden administration. But you mentioned national security issues at the start of our conversation. What are the potential risks and consequences for his not handling this transition in a normal way?
I think the real risk would come if there were a national security crisis. After all, we have there's American soldiers all through the Middle East. There is a tension with Iran that goes back, of course, quite a long ways and has had some explosive elements this year. Certainly the South China Sea issues. So there are potential national security questions that could arise. Hopefully they won't, but could arise. That would really raise questions about how the United States should respond. And you'd want in that circumstance the outgoing president to be consulting with the new president.
Not to mention he fired his defense secretary yesterday, too. So all of that into the mix. I so enjoyed that conversation. Thanks, Professor Schwartz. I hope to be able to speak to you again as we continue to watch the evolving story there.
Well, thank you very much again for having me on the program.
Thomas Schwartz from Nashville, Tennessee.